I was the technical manager of the facility and started my relationship with Oxford CryoStream very early on because I heard that there was a magic new device in the basement of the Clarendon lab called, well, I don't even think it had a name then actually, but that would provide 100 Kelvin or so at the crystal without being a pressurized dewar in the lab, which all the previous devices were a liquid nitrogen dewar which you had a heating coil in to force the gas through, and that meant when you filled the dewar up you got a huge change in temperature at the crystal and you couldn't really control it. So I went over and met Mike Glaser and John Cozier, and remember I had been in physics for 11 years, so I sort of knew Mike already because I'd had to demonstrate in the labs and I'd come across him, so that's how I heard about the device. And they lifted out the cryo leg out of the liquid nitrogen dewar and they waved it around in the air like this for 30 seconds and then put it back, and the temperature at the crystal remained 100K, and I'm like, we have to have one of these. So that's how my relationship with this company started, and we were the first structural biology in the world to have one, and we have number 14.
Oh, nice. So this CryoStream was groundbreaking for crystallography and for structural biology, right?
Absolutely, because of the radiation damage that occurs at a protein crystal at room temperature. And that's mainly because protein crystals, the word crystal is a bit of a misnomer. They're a bit like if you have synchronized swimmers in a swimming pool and each swimmer is a protein molecule. They don't fit together exactly, there's water in between them. But so they're lined up in an ordered array, but there's all this water. And of course, when you hit that with X-rays, you get radiolysis and you get aqueous electrons wandering around, and you get OH radicals, which then go through chemistry to produce peroxides and so on. So if you can immobilize these secondary products, then perhaps you get a longer lifetime, and in fact that's exactly what happens. So you can't do anything about the primary absorption of the X-rays, you're going to get that's fact of physics, but what you can do is immobilize the products of that, and they all are immobilized at 100 Kelvin apart from one, which causes us some trouble, which is why I've spent the last 25 years looking at the effects of that one wandering artifact on moiety rather on protein crystals, and that's the electron. So they quantum mechanically tunnel, they have remaining thermal energy, and they move around the structure and cause specific structural damage to the crystal, and mean that it doesn't have an infinite lifetime at 100K either, but you get around 70 times more data at 100K than you got at room temperature. So that's a huge benefit, and that's why I think the last count, it was 89% of the protein data bank structures have been X-ray structures have been determined using a cryostat and 100 Kelvin.
You've mentioned 100 Kelvin, but why and how this temperature was established?
That's a very good question, and quite honestly at the beginning it was a fluke. So you can run these devices at 90 Kelvin. Obviously the lowest, the liquid nitrogen's at 77, just over 77 Kelvin, but the lower you run it, the more nitrogen you use, liquid nitrogen you use to feed it. And we did notice that actually things didn't last as long if it was higher, and we did a lot of temperature ramp experiments at the beginning. But 100K at the tip of the device means that by the time that gaseous nitrogen reaches the crystal, it's at about 106, according to my thermocouple measurements. And it turns out that it's now been established at Diamond Light Source, actually, by Robin Owen, who was a case student sponsored by Oxford CryoStream from 2002 to 2005. He's established that the OH radicals that I already mentioned, they start to become mobile at around 110 Kelvin. So what we did know was that there's a phase transition in water in pure water at 136 Kelvin. So you've obviously got to be below that, because otherwise you get the density of the amorphous solid that you've achieved by cryocooling rather than freezing. But that's the crystal, that goes through a density change, which you don't want to happen while you're collecting X-ray data. So we were very lucky really to choose 100K, because that's what most cryo devices are run at now for protein crystallography.